Okay, welcome back, everyone. I apologize for the interruption. We are ironing out the technology, and we actually are the actual employees, the Eisenhower staff are the ones running it today, so we are learning as we go. We'll bring back David and let him pick up where he left off. Thank you.
Okay, I'm back. If I recall, I just finished Alan W. Dulles. Now the next individual, if we're still on, are we on slide 3? Okay, showed President Eisenhower, then Alan Dulles and Andrew Goodpaster. This is a person many of you may not have heard of, but his the staff secretary to president is also a key liaison between the president and the intelligence community and the military agencies as well. And he would also sit on these very high level meetings dealing with intelligence and take careful notes. And thanks to Andrew Goodpaster, we have a pretty good record of some pretty high level sensitive materials, some of which are still classified today. And he would also relay the president's approval or disapproval on U-2 flights and other decisions involving intelligence. Now we can move on to slide 4. Additional people, I will just go through these quickly. I know time, we got a lot of ground to cover, but Edwin Land, founder of Polaroid, high on camera photo technology, and was one of the leading advocates of the U-2 plane. Richard Bissell Jr. was a CIA official who was charged with planning and administering the U-2 program. By the way, his papers are now part of the Eisenhower Library's holdings, and for an intelligence person, he seemed to be fairly articulate and spoke out a little bit, so it'd be a good source. And James Killian, a key science advisor, had been president of MIT and was advisor to the president, head of the President's Science Advisory Committee, and a leading force on promoting the Corona satellite. And then the next slide 5, Eisenhower greeting Dr. Killian. Now we'll move on to the next one, slide 6. And 6 and 7, and this one actually was a memorandum of a conversation between the president and the secretaries of individual services. And what this conveys, the highlighted, he told them, an adversary armed with the which means nuclear weapons, could knock out the U.S. in 30 days. So that was the fear. That goes back to saying a fear of surprise attack, which pervaded and was on the president's mind throughout this period. So 7, and again, that's okay. And then we get into we'll move on to slide 8. And this was a portion of a meeting of the National Security Council. At these meetings, the president be briefed on intelligence, and he'd also lead discussions of various national security matters. He was informed, briefed on a Soviet long-range bomber, which is capable of delivering atomic weapons to the United States and dropping and returning. And he was also informed of a loss of a plane, a B-50, all in the Sea of Japan. They discussed this a little bit, but during these incidents, these shoot-down incidents involving the periphery of denied territory, China or the U.S., we tended to play those down. We'd send protests, but we didn't want to try to keep these from flaming into major crises. So. And also Eisenhower pointed out this plane was flying toward Vladivostok, which is a major Russian city, and it wasn't as unprovoked an attack as people might think. So he tended to play that one down. In fact, that takes us through 8, 9, 10, and 11. If you read those, that would give you the discussion. I don't want to rush, but at the same time, we've got a lot of territory to cover, but we'll be talking more about these peripheral missions in just a little bit. The next be slide 12, was a cover page and table of contents of a major report by a panel, and the title was Meeting the Threat of Surprise Attack. The president commissioned this panel in 1954 to cover this problem, even back when in December, when it told the chiefs of services that an adversary could knock the country out. He hadn't been just twiddling his thumbs. He had been taking actions. And earlier in 54, he appointed this committee, which had James Killian, had Dan Land, and many other prominent technological specialists to study everything from guided missile technology to aerial intelligence, one of the key Cold War documents of this period. And even today, there are portions of it still classified, although the majority of it has been. Now we'll get into the area of peripheral flight, slide 13. Periphery means you're flying around the edges outside the boundaries of the Soviet Union, China. You're supposed to stay out of their airspace, but fly around. And what they would do, a variety of planes, bombers, occasional fighters, as a time passed from B-50s, RB-47s, a variety of aircraft flying around in north and to the east of the Soviet Union, even in the Navy participated in these operations off the coast of in the Sea of Japan. And we're keeping an eye on China as well. And they were trying to pick up radar intelligence. What they would do is go and ferret out radar installations, bait the Russians into turn on the radar so we could determine how strong the radar system was. We'd pick up any kind of communications, message communication. We could intercept them so comment and ELINT as those types of intelligence were called. So these are critical. And in the next slide, 14 and 15, it was August 30th, 1956 record of a report, a downing of a Navy plane near Shanghai. The Chinese took out this one with its entire crew. Eisenhower complained about that the military did not have an adequate cover story regarding this mission. And then we go on to slide 16. And this will show the cost of these peripheral missions could be high. During this time, it reported for April 1950 to April 1969, 165 air crew were involved in shot in these shoot downs. 14 planes shot down, 165 air crew participated, 12 were recovered alive, and 28 bodies recovered and 128 reported missing. Most of these missing have always remained missing. They never found the remains. And thus the widows and next of kin of lost personnel tried to find out what happened to their husbands, their relatives, who were lost in this cloak of secrecy. These missions were so highly classified because of the nature of the intelligence that they sometimes had a difficult time finding out. So, but then we move on to slides, let's see, 16 or 17. And this was a memorandum of a conversation between the president and General Nathan Twining, who was chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. General Twining came in to talk to the president about these peripheral missions, these ELINT and comment missions. We were picking up information. He wanted to make sure we could continue. So he talked at length about we would try to be careful. So this was on the day that the last shoot-down incident in the Eisenhower administration, as far as we know, occurred July 1st, 1960, when a RB-47 was shot down apparently in international waters north of the Soviet Union. Four men were killed, 2 were rescued by the Russians, eventually turned over to the United States after Eisenhower left office. So there's The ferret, these people in these missions didn't always get to play, haven't always gotten to play in history. They've been, their losses and their missions been kind of clouded by secrecy. But they certainly, our agency thought they were doing essential work. And 14, 15, 16, and 17, you'll take a look at a document. If you look through all four of those slides, you'll see there are portions of them are taken out. Even today, that document's classified, probably top secret, requiring special handling. So people, that's what frustrates people when they do research. You'll find big chunks taken out. Nevertheless, this document would tell you quite a bit about the nature of this work. For example, the 55th Strategic Reconnaissance Wing, which at that time was based in Topeka, Forbes Air Force Base in Topeka, they were responsible for gathering 95% of the electronic intelligence that the Air Force did. They had wings, of course, stationed overseas to do that, but there was a tie to connect Kansas there. Another unit was stationed down in Texas, Loveland Air Force Base, and they had at least 24 U-2s. So this would tell you the types of planes they had, the missions, sometimes 6 missions a month up to July 1st. And also the normal behavior of the Russians were not to go out and shoot these planes down. Instead, they'd fly and pace them alongside. They just pace, keep an eye on them. As long as they stayed where we were, they wouldn't do anything. And they found out even the Swedes were doing some of the same things. So that would indicate some of the areas where they're doing these peripheral missions. These are all around, supposedly outside the Soviet Union. So this was the peripheral warfare or intelligence gathering, and it's one of our functions. Now I guess we move to the next slide. We'll show you, if you've seen the heavily redacted briefing, we get a picture of an RB-47. These are one of the type of planes shot down on July 1st and were used in many of these missions. Okay, now we move into slide 23 is the balloons. Okay. Get through this just a little bit. Let's see. Oh, no, we're in the CENTCENT missions. Yeah, that's enough. I'm in the CENTCENT. That is a program which we didn't know much about at all until just a few years ago. Thanks to a historian for the National Reconnaissance Office, he was able to dig up information and organize a symposium which met in 2001 in Washington of veterans of what became known as these CENTCENTs. Now, while the peripheral flights stayed outside the borders of the Soviet Union, the CENTCENTs involved military planes, bombers equipped with camera equipment, crewed, staffed by Air Force crews, military planes flying, penetrating from the periphery. We went into the actual penetration of Soviet airspace. That's a pretty sensitive, dicey thing. As Eisenhower would later say, nothing would have caused him to ask for a declaration of war any quicker than for Russian planes to fly over U.S. And yet we did it there. We did it because we could do it. We could get away with it because they're at that time, their radar, their anti-aircraft defenses weren't as strong as they later would become. Eisenhower knew we were working against time. The Russians would be continually upgrading their anti-aircraft, their fighter capabilities, and ultimately their anti-aircraft missiles. So during this time, we were and the British were participating in these as well. And the thing about these CENTCENT missions, they kept no written record. There's no record found in the Eisenhower Library of the origin. Sometime in late 1953, Eisenhower made the decision to send flights through this. In 1954, the first ones occurred. Despite the risky nature, the U.S. only experienced, as far as we can tell, the record's still cloudy. One plane was attacked and damaged because it made the mistake of flying over northern Russia in daytime. The MiGs had been stirred up by the British, having flown to a similar just a few days before. So MiGs came at, shot at, damaged, but the plane limped back to England. But most of the U.S. missions of the Simpsons were done in the Far East. We go on to slide, let's see, we got to go into slide 25. That's a memo for the record, October 3rd, 1956. I've never seen the term since in any document here, but you can, thanks to the internal evidence, we can determine this does relate to that. Now, 1956 was a very busy year. There's a lot of things going on. For the reconnaissance, we still had the ferrets, we had the synths in, we started sending balloons up, and ultimately we'd start our first U-2 flights over Russia occurred in 56. Russians are a little bit busy that year too. They're suppressing protests in Poland, sending tanks into Hungary, and making ominous comments during the height of the Suez crisis. So it was a pretty hectic year, but so in 56, United States had sent a mission called Operation Home Run, which flew across the northern periphery of the Soviet Union. Russia protested. And then in late 56, the president was met, and they were concerned about these reconnaissance missions. They were finding out too much about it. We're getting too much heat from them. But the military thought we should continue. So he agreed to one last mission in the Far East, which flew in December 56. The Russians, it flew right over Vladivostok, took pictures, and then when they got back, the Russians protested, and Eisenhower then canceled the Simpson program. At that time, U-2's been going over, so he temporarily shut those down as well. But all these things are happening at once. So this seemed to be a hectic story because it got hectic at times. But so even while he was worried about the Simpsons and the beginning of the U-2, we tried to send up balloons. Balloons there've been millions of dollars invested in balloons since the end of World War II. And the Air Force in particular thought the balloons could be developed so they could be sent over. Let's see, I think that'd be slide. Let me make sure for our slides. Okay, slide 27. Oh, slide 26, we're getting ahead of RB-57. I'm kind of having to move along here a little bit. Slide 27 of balloons. And then we'll go on slide 28, and I'll show the launch of two types of balloons. The one was launched in a smaller one in 1956. One of the Air Force officials said they're not likely to be shot down now. The Russians can't touch them. Well, it turns out they did shoot some of them down, armed with cameras, and they got Russian protests. So the balloon, so Eisenhower canceled out. But again, in 58, the larger type was floated for a while. That too didn't work out much. So it will eventually dispensed with the balloons, and so they were just not worth the effort. So now we move on from, let's go to slide 30. And that's should be the U-2. The U-2 plane was described by Edwin Land, who is one of its real strong advocates, as a glider by Lockheed designed to fly at 70,000 feet, well out of Soviet interception range. The plane is light, just weighing 15,000 pounds, unarmed, and is devoid of military utility. It would minimize affront to the Soviets if in the remote chance it was intercepted. Land indicated the first priority would be photography and secondarily electronic. And he warned advised that the opportunity to do this would last only a few years. The Soviets will develop ways to intercept. So they're, again, rushing against time, see if our technology could stay ahead of theirs. And then we move to slide 31, illustrates the global reach of the communist bloc. And then you see it reached even the Western Hemisphere by eventually took Cuba. So then we have slide 32. We'll give you a photo of the U-2 plane. And according to the official CI history U-2 project, the aircraft was difficult to fly. They had to figure out how to keep pilots' blood from boiling at 65,000 feet or higher. Bailout procedures had to be developed. Such basic needs as eating, drinking, and bathroom had to be taken care of as well. According to Richard Bissell, who was one of the administered program, at least 5 pilots died in the course of U-2 training, and 1 or 2 more were killed in Europe in non-enemy related accidents. So the one cause of the fatalities were engine flame out and inability of pilot to restart the engine. Of course, they brought Eisenhower's meeting. In fact, we go to slide 33. In November, he authorized the funding of 30 U-2 planes at $35 million. His Secretary of State, John Foster Dulles, had commented, difficulties might arise, but we could live through them. It's kind of prophetic. So this plane was difficult to fly. They hired, a lot of times there'd been Air Force pilots who retired. Eisenhower insisted that this program be run by a civilian agency rather than the Air Force. Allen Dulles kind of would rather the Air Force take that too, but Eisenhower insisted on that. So, and you'll see slide 34, a memorandum of record by Andrew Goodpaster, February 8, 1960. Eisenhower met with a very elaborate board of high-powered individuals. It's called the Board of Consultants on Foreign Intelligence Activities. The board advised that the intelligence required for the U-2 reconnaissance was worthwhile. This is February 1960. Now we back up on the next few slides. We slide 35. A memo for a need for, and then a certain term is still redacted, and a map showing U-2 routes. Intelligence target there was Soviet missile sites. One of the first significant findings of the U-2 was a missile base at Taratam. I don't know whether I pronounced that right, but that was a significant discovery. So it enables to keep an eye on their missile sites there and some in the Urals and other locations. Then combined with some radar installations in Turkey, I believe, these enabled the Eisenhower administration to determine that the Russians were not ahead of the U.S. in missile development, although they were kept on it because the Russians were developing missiles, and we were afraid we'd have the long-range nuclear-tipped guided missiles. So in the next one, of a map showing the U-2 routes into northern Russia, plus a data on cloud cover. The cloud cover would make a difference how much visibility, whether you could see anything to photograph. Later on, of course, well, let's see, we'll go on. But these, Eisenhower would agonize. We went through the memos of these meetings. Various people, the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary or the Director of Central Intelligence, the Chairman of Joint Chiefs say, we need this. Eisenhower, yeah, but they may put heat on Berlin, or we're trying to work for a arms control agreement. So he'd sometimes back off and eventually we're calling, okay, 1 or 2 more missions. We're not going to just let a lot fly. He ran it with a tight fist. But we get up into 1960, and he did agree to a couple of flights in early 1960. One of these came in April and came back unscathed. By this time, the Russians' anti-aircraft missile capacity was increasing, and their MiGs, they developed MiG fighters, which we could also go up to a higher heights. Even Richard Bissell, a year before the shoot down, said the Soviets may have a fighter that could jump up to 70,000 feet. So they knew it was just a matter of time before the Russians would cut this off or make it too dangerous. And Eisenhower didn't like the tension it was building anyway. So he who had sent these bombers over in 54, 55, 56 was having real heartburn, but he agreed to send the planes over in April. And these came back with a lot of revealing data on more missile bases. And they thought, well, that was so good. Why would we send one more? They couldn't touch that one. And Bissell had said, okay, we got by with this and maybe we can send one more. So Eisenhower on April 25th said, send one more plane, but it's not to be done after May 1st. Well, on May 1st, 1960, Francis Gary Powers got in his plane in Pakistan and took off for what would have been the longest flight over Russia. It had gone all the way across the Soviet Union and all the way to Norway. Well, on the way, something happened. This is what Bissell described this as follows. The Russians have been tracking these planes. They've been tracking from day one. Eisenhower had been led to believe that they couldn't be tracking them. The first flights which went over Moscow and Leningrad back in 56 had been tracked by the radar, but they couldn't do anything about it. But their intercept capability was growing. So on May 1st, the Russians sent out 3 MiG interceptors, and then they also launched 3 missiles, anti-aircraft missiles. The first missile missed the plane totally. The second one shot down one of the Russians' interceptor MiGs. The third one detonated just close enough to the U-2 to disable it and start spinning out of control. So as the U-2 is spiraling downward, Francis Gary Powers desperately was struggling to get out, and with great difficulty is able to do so. He had a strong sense of survival, so he bailed out and parachuted to the ground, where he was promptly apprehended by Russians. He was turned over in 1961, traded back for a swap, but Khrushchev made sure it was after Eisenhower left office on that one. So now many people have debated it. Why did Eisenhower send a flight that close to the summit meeting was scheduled just a couple of weeks later? Why did he do that? And one historian who's written extensively had access to some of these documents I've looked at and said this was probably his biggest mistake he ever made. Well, that'd be up to whether people agree or not. Would you agree that was a mistake when you get caught? Yeah, that looks like a mistake. It had gathered a lot of intelligence, but this writer makes a play say, okay, the Board of Consultants on Foreign Intelligence wanted, they wanted to do, the CIA wanted the mission to go, the Joint Chiefs and the Defense Department wanted all this aimed at it. Eisenhower gave in and sent it. But if you know something about Eisenhower, he often said, don't make any mistakes in a hurry. So if this is a mistake, it wasn't because he made it in a hurry. He carefully calculated, and he also being the card player, the card shark he was in his earlier days anyway, he calculated and decided we could get by this time. Bissell thinks maybe they'd gotten a little too confident because of the success of the one 2 weeks before. So he sent, and Powers shot down, captured, and the cover story for this was based on if a plane is lost, assumption was the plane was destroyed and the pilot was killed. Well, Khrushchev played it coy and waited for a few days, and all of a sudden, while they were trying to come up with their conflicting weather stories, and this put the United States in a bad light, Eisenhower in a bad light, and they later admit it was handled very badly. In fact, later on, Eisenhower told Prime Minister Macmillan of Britain, when they're talking about their mutual sharing of reconnaissance, that his only regret about this is his cover story it assumed that they wouldn't capture a pilot alive. So whether it's a mistake or not, it happened, and of course the summit conference is canceled, And we went from there. And if we move on to some of the others, there's another comment to make. Alan Dulles did in August. I don't think we have this memo here. He listed U-2 flights over Russia and 26 flights over Russia and numerous other countries. And the U-2 continued to be used in peripheral missions. It was used during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and the first actually KI killed in action occurred during Cuba. A pilot was shot down over Cuba and killed in 1962, but it passed on information which enabled President Kennedy to kind of deal with the Cuban Missile Crisis there. And U-2s continued to be used later years as well, and gets into more recent times. If you move on to slides 38, you see Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev inspecting display of the U-2 wreckage. And slide 39, items removed from the U-2, including the needle, which contained a very potent poison, which was supposedly rendered death in 12 to 14 seconds. For pilots who choose this option. But even while the U-2 were agonizing over U-2 flights, even before, Eisenhower had been thinking about successor to U-2, which it would be much more difficult to track. So if you get slide 6, it's the A-12, which actually it made its first flight in 1962. But it was, and the SR-71 was also developed, was almost identical. And these could fly over 2,000 miles an hour, past the speed of sound. And apparently, as the surface temperature outside one of these planes is 500 degrees, how fast they went. So it was an awesome plane. And apparently, the A-12 and the SR-71 were never shot down. Of course, with subsequent events rendered the need for this type of reconnaissance less critical, because we were going to move into another era. So now we might move to slide, should be 41, satellites. This comes the crown jewel of the Eisenhower's intelligence gathering. The discoverer Corona, according to the editor of the official study on Corona, the America's first satellite. Well, I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. First of all, even though August 18th, 1960 is the most successful, the Corona was finally put into orbit. Before that, people think of the first reconnaissance satellite. Technically, U.S. first reconnaissance satellite was GRAB, called Galactic Radiation and Background, called it GRAB. It was launched successfully on June 22nd, 1960. It picked up electronic data, but didn't have cameras. But on the Corona was a code name for this highly developed satellite, which would have camera equipment. It was designed to go up to as far as 150 miles, make 3 orbits, and then come back and and eject a capsule, which would be recovered by the cooperation of the Air Force and the Navy. In February 1958, this is a slide. Actually, slide 42 gives you an illustration of this. We're trying to keep up with. And then slide 43, Dr. Killian made his proposal on the reconnaissance satellite. He called it an Earth satellite equipped with photographic apparatus and a recoverable capsule to yield scientific and military information. Circle Earth 3 times, then eject a capsule. Totally covert. The Navy to help recover it. Dr. Land emphasized it was for intelligence purpose, and you had to be covert, or else the Russians could have taken measures on the ground to fool the camera, said. And so that was they had to develop a cover story. There have been other satellite programs. The Air Force has been running them, so Eisenhower split this program off from the other one and kept to keep it a secret, and gave a cover story, Discoverer, This was a cover name which had blended in with other activities which are a little more public and known. They'd send satellites in space, do what the Russians been doing, collect information on man in space and various other technical data, but they kept the real purpose secret, and they knew they were ahead of the Russians on photograph technology. So, but they had the plan, and they had to get it to work. So 12 attempts to put Corona flights into orbit, 12 failed. They at least, sometimes they lost the capsule. One attempt, they sent a capsule of mice, inserted the mice to try and test the biological aspects of space travel. Well, the capsule ejected and the mice drowned. As far as I know, those are the only live casualties of these failures, although there was a lot of money spent. And here's the thing, if one of these Corona satellites had gone up and they'd recovered successfully, they'd never had to send Francis Gary Powers up. That's one of the great what might have beens of history. But they used the cover story, and this time the cover story worked. In fact, the Corona was not declassified until the 1990s. You'd see reference to, there were probably reference to it, but the government did not officially confirm its existence in the 1990s. Thus, documents sent in for declassification review before then were routinely denied. Finally, in the 1990s and the 2000s, we started seeing more material declassified. So now if we get to, slide, I'm jumping ahead, 43, can we move on to 45? And this, you're going to see an image of the President of the United States engaging in a covert operation. This was Corona 13. He's picking up a flag and other materials from a capsule have been recovered out of the ocean by the Navy. So you had several people involved who were present there. We were looking for photographs. We tried our best to find Andrew Goodpaster. He was there, but he wasn't in those pictures. The rascal decided to stay behind the scenes, I guess. But that's a kind of a significant picture showing success at last. So next, on August 18th, Corona 14 made the launch. 3 missions, and this time the capsule was ejected and the plane snatched it out of the air. It's the first time that it achieved that accomplishment, and they brought it in, or interpreted the data, and there you had pictures of, in fact, like slide 46 shows us a plane carrying the capsule for photographic data. Slide 47, one of the first images USSR taken by Corona. And then slide 48 to 50, there was lengthy documents on the cover plan for Corona. They went to great lengths to keep this one a secret. So that was, as a result, Eisenhower accomplished a goal which he had announced publicly at Geneva in 1955 when he proposed open skies. The Russians rejected it in 1955 at Geneva, but he managed through the use of the satellite to open them anyway. And thus, the satellites have been since then used for to monitor arms limitation tests, nuclear test ban tests, and other kinds of treaties have been signed during the 70s and 80s. Now, the last slide is a document packet focusing on aerial reconnaissance, which I think could be possible adaptation for classroom use. This was done by the library staff. I was involved into another esteemed colleague of myself, Jim Lyersoff, was involved, and our declassification, several other people were involved. We had copies of selected documents, a list of terminology, a list of key people, and it would give a teacher a chance to give an instruction in the use of intelligence. It could be we've used it for official government people, but and I've seen college students use it, but I'm sure the staff at the Eisenhower Library would be willing to work with you if you have any questions on that one. Now I'll just sum this up and I'll open up for questions. The aerial reconnaissance programs carried out in the 1950s revolutionized intelligence gathering. U-2 collected data helped dispel the myth of the missile gap between U.S. and USSR. The successful launching of Corona 9009, the Discoverer 14, should be considered a crowning achievement in the Eisenhower administration. It should be included on any timeline for the period as well as any museum exhibits. I understand it. In fact, the Discoverer 13 capsules now on display in the Smithsonian Institution. But so many histories and timelines I've seen, they cut off the U-2 and this rather rough, bumpy ending of the Eisenhower administration. They should certainly put this one in as a success. So that capped off the reconnaissance activity of the Eisenhower administration. Now I guess I'll just this time throw it open to questions.
The U-2s were not armed, were they?
They were not. No, there haven't been no military weaponry at all on them. They were civilians, strictly planned. Eisenhower insisted they would be flown, at least during the ones over Russia, were flown by civilians. Now, on the later applications, I'm sure they were used by military personnel. I think it was as an Air Force officers killed over Cuba, but for flying over Russia, there were civilians. They were totally unarmed.
Did I understand correctly that during this time of reconnaissance, there were about 150 people that were missing or killed?
Yeah, there's 165 reported missing. There's some data about the Department, the DOD POWMI office. They had this data. We picked that out several years ago, and according to that, there's 14 shoot downs, 165 air crew involved, 12 living persons survived, and 28 bodies, and the rest remain missing, probably deceased. That's the ones we know about.
Harry Powers is the only name that I ever remember, being shot down. So the others.
Yeah, see, the peripherals, I have a special feeling for them because they operate in the shadows of secrecy on the peripheries, and historians haven't given them their fair due. There is an article in Aerospace magazine, which you can pick up on the internet, which would give more information. If I find it in my notes here, but that would. I've got some, but there is one. I'll find that for you before I fumble around. But if you're interested, but as you, yeah, in fact, Cold War shoot downs, I'm thinking you can find that on there, but I would give more information. But it's tough.
The U-2 pilots were civilians, correct?
Pardon?
The U-2
They
pilots were civilians.
They're civilians, yeah. They may have had military.
So I'm assuming they were ex-military, probably.
I think most of them probably were, yeah.
And then how were they contacted to do these flights? Do you know? Was the CIA involved in any of this?
Oh, yeah, the CIA was definitely involved in
I
it.
suspect. So
Yes.
the planes were the CIA involved. The planes and the pilots, was that all part of the CIA part?
Well, okay, Lockheed, the U-2 is developed by a major defense contract firm. Lockheed developed it, and there's sure some defense money went into that. But the CIA, it was CIA overseeing and planning it. But yeah, you had to have some Air Force and cooperation and some of their personnel involved. But supposedly the CIA was planning it. Bissell was the point man on it for the CIA. Any other, is there still some unclarity there? It's kind of a foggy world in intelligence. There's a lot of, it's enshrouded. There's still shrouds of secrecy out there. And there's some of the story you get out, but not all of it. That's kind of the way it is out there.
reconnaissance now by satellite? Are there flights yet?
I think we got unmanned vehicles and their satellites are still going up. Yeah, the Russians now would have same thing we would, but we got the jump on them, and for a few years we were able to beat them a punch on that one. You just think if we could have gotten Corona up there in April 1960, we could avoid a major international incident. That's one of the what might have beens of history, because they picked up more. One pass picked up more photographic coverage than all the U-2s we sent.
Yeah, you know, the Navy also playing the Pacific a couple years ago, shot down, or collided with the Chinese fighter, and sort of forced it down. I think that was probably not the reconnaissance mission, not sure.
Yeah, okay, yeah, that was been more recent. There's some incidents past that, like us in 1969, there was a plane shot down by the North Koreans, lost a crew on that one. So but this time frame is covered up to 1969. But yeah, I'm sure there's been a few incidents since then. We're still some reconnaissance goes on. When you're getting into more recent era, which that gets into things, a lot of that's still classified, and I don't have access to that type of information. So we don't know, we don't tell, do we, on those things?
We do have one question that is from online from Christopher Bright. He writes, as you point out, the desire to prevent another Pearl Harbor was a significant motivating factor during Ike's administration, a fact many have forgotten. Do you think the museum and library will continue to push for declassification of relevant documents? Christopher's thinking here of some of the Killian Commission papers which remain classified.
Okay, the library is always open to declassification. If anyone comes in, does research, finds anything that's withdrawn, we have withdrawal sheets. They can place a mandatory review for a declassification of that. See, our classified holdings up until 2019, we held all those, and the neighbors all sent back to the National Declassification Center of the National Archives in Washington. But staff would have the researcher fill them out, would send to the National Declassification Center. They'd coordinate with the agency on that. Yeah, we always promote declassification where we can. We've tried to do that for many years.
I was just going to say, we have a gentleman here in Allen, Clark
Carroll, who's in a nursing home here and who flew in Laos, which you're not allowed to fly in Laos. It was during Vietnam War. Anybody know Clark Carroll? You know, he's a neat guy. He was Air Force Lieutenant Colonel back then. He was probably a mere captain. But he, civilian clothes, no ID card. If he shot down, he was working for the CIA that year. You know,
Yeah,
basically.
Laos, we're doing
That's
lots.
the kind of thing that was going on here with, and I think Francis Gary Powers was either retired, he was maybe retired
I
major.
think he's retired,
He was
yeah.
a retired Air Force pilot, of course, but he was retired. So they were recruited, you know.
But yeah, there's a lot going on in Laos. That's another story. It'd be something ought to give a good program on Southeast Eisenhower and Southeast Asia. That'd be a good program topic right there. Laos was a hot button issue at the very tail end of his administration. There's one memo that said if we may have to go in there with or without allies. That's in the foreign relations United States. But Laos was definitely on Eisenhower's mind till he left office. And we were doing stuff, and some's documented.
David, has the code word been classified yet?
As what?
The code word been classified yet?
Oh, the code word, they call, the talent. Yeah, talent is out there. Cargill Hall's published that. And the satellite's keyhole, talent keyhole, yeah, that's out. It wasn't a few years ago, but it is now.
Well, if you don't have any other questions, I will say thank you so much, David. And we just have a few things before we say goodbye for the afternoon. First of all, thank you all for coming. Thank you to my colleagues who have stepped in for me. I'm a little under the weather, and so they have stepped up and stepped in for me, so I appreciate that. But we have a few announcements. June is looking to be a very, very exciting month for us. First of all, our Symphony at Sunset is on June 1st, 2024. That is next Saturday. It is the 80th anniversary, so it will be a little bit bigger than the symphony is traditionally. So come on out. We'll start at 1 o'clock. Have all kinds of great things going on. Things for kids, things for adults, and just a great, fun, free afternoon. The next week is our World War II Symposium, our Emerging Scholars Symposium. That has become an annual event for us. It is virtual only, June 4th through the 6th, and you can find the links for that on our YouTube page. Also, the Eisenhower Foundation is hosting a D-Day event on June 6th, also a free day right here. And if you'll come on out for that, we'll certainly be happy to have you. And then we have a Civil Rights Conference at the end of the month. That will be a hybrid of in-person and virtual. Also, not completely free, but low cost, $19.54 is the registration. If you'd like to join us, we'd love to have you. You can find information on our website and on Eventbrite. And then continuing on with our Waging Peace, we are looking at peace on the home front in June. And so we are going to be looking at the appointment of Justice Earl Warren to the Supreme Court and the importance of that on the Brown v. Board decision. And that will be right here again on June 27th. So we would love to have you back for that. You can find out any of this information on our email list, or by joining our email list, we'll send it to you. And then last but not least, we do want to thank our sponsors. That is the Jeff Koch Memorial Foundation and the Eisenhower Foundation. Without them, we would not be able to have these programs. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon.